everyone, and welcome. Thank you for hanging around. We had a couple of technical difficulties there at the beginning, but it seems like we've gotten it sorted now, so we're going to get going. Just quickly going to cover our code of conduct. Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and our presenters. So we encourage engagement in the chat, but we just ask that you're mindful of your commentary and you remain on topic. This session is recorded. It will appear in the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel for on-demand access in like about 48 to 72 hours. I know that we were a little bit delayed with the start, so if we do run over on time and you can't stay on the call, do feel free to check us out on YouTube for that on-demand for later. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. And then, which brings us to today's session. The Reactor is joined again by Ite Malka from 2B Cloud. They are a Microsoft partner, and today they will show you how to integrate Azure Key Vault with AKS clusters. So I'm going to bring our speaker up here in just a moment. Ite, did you want to just unmute yourself, and then we will come up? Did you want your camera on, Ite, or? Oh,
Yeah,
there we go.
sure.
Hey, okay. So yeah, thank you all for tuning in, and apologies again for the delay there with the session start, but we are good and ready to go. Welcome, welcome. So glad to
Thanks
have
a
you
lot.
back. You always have great sessions with lots of wonderful information, so happy to have you again.
I'm happy to be here.
Um, Awesome. So whenever you're ready, I feel like we should just jump right into it. You can share your screen and I'll pull it up.
Yeah, sure. So we'll start. Just a moment. Great. So just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep, there we go. You are up and running.
Amazing. Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you for joining my webinar about how to integrate Azure Key Vault with AKS Cluster. So this is another one in the AKS webinar series. So, who didn't took a part in the previous webinar? So nice to meet you all. My name is Itai Malka. I was south of born in Israel. I love C music, and who knows me, especially food, and also I'm a cloud solution architect team leader at 2B Cloud. So who we are, who 2B Cloud? We are a Microsoft partner specialized in working with tech companies. We are MSP expert with advanced specialization in Windows and SQL Server migration, Kubernetes on Microsoft Azure, modernization of web app in Azure, and basically our passion is working with tech companies and seeing them grow. 2B Cloud is a global cloud MSP that specializes in working with tech companies, as I said, including startups, SMBs, ISVs, and unicorns. We help to plan, build, and run cloud-based solutions by offering zero-cost consultancy, training, and 24/7 tech support and cloud cost optimization. So here's the agenda for today. So let's talk about it. Basically, we are going to implement a solution which will allow us to integrate between Azure Key Vault, when I will store all my secrets, and my AKS, where I will use them. We will use CSI driver. Who knows? So the secret store CSI driver allows Kubernetes to mount multiple secrets, keys, and certificates stored in enterprise-grade external secret stores into their pods as a volume. So once the pod volume is attached, the data in it is mounted into the container's file system. So in order to implement this solution, we need that our cluster will be able to communicate with the Key Vault on Azure. So in general, to, to allow applications to communicate with Azure Cloud resources, we have multiple ways, such as using service principal or managed identities. So today, and in this case, we will use the AAD pod identity, and I will say a lot AAD. AAD just represents the Azure Active Directory. So this is the identity method we are going to use today. So let's talk and understand how it works according to this diagram. So as we can see, basically, the AAD pod identity just enables all of the Kubernetes objects, applications, resources to access the cloud resources securely with the Azure Active Directory. And how it works, an identity is represented in Kubernetes as an Azure identity. It's a CRD, custom resource definition on Kubernetes. The labels on the pods are used to indicate the association to cloud identities. These associations are represented by Azure Identity Binding CRD, as we can see here. And the Azure assigned identities are internal CIDs created when a match is found between bindings and the pod labels. And as we can understand, this diagram just describes the relationships between all the different components, and we're going to see exactly how it works in the next few moments. So what's next? When we deploy the AAD pod identity, the following two components are deployed to the AKS cluster, and it's according to Microsoft documentation. So the first one is the MIC, the Managed Identity Controller, and you can see all the components in the diagram. It will make sense better. And the Managed Identity Controller is just a Kubernetes controller, that watches for changes to pods, Azure Identity, and Azure Identity Binding through the Kubernetes API server, like other controllers on Kubernetes. When it detects, let's say, a relevant change, the MIC adds or delete on demand an Azure assigned identity as needed. Specifically, when a pod is scheduled, the MIC assigns the managed identity on Azure to the underlying virtual machine scale set, VMSS, used by the node pool during the creation phase. When all the pods using the identity are deleted, it removes the identity from the VMSS of the node pool unless the same managed identity is used by other pods. The second component is the NMI, the node managed identity. The NMI is a pod that runs as a daemon set on each node in our cluster. NMI intercepts security tokens requests to the Azure Instance Metadata Service on each node. As you can see, this is in the diagram, this is the Azure IMDS, and redirect them to itself and validates if the pod has access to the identity it's requesting a token for, and fetch the token from the Azure Active Directory tenant on behalf of the application. So that is the flow only of the AAD pod identity. And now I want to talk about, I will start in the next few moments with the demo of the Key Vault integration and how it relates to the AAD pod identity. But in the next few minutes, you can find over the chat two documentations related both to the AAD pod identity and the Key Vault, the access from Key Vault secrets. So you can just follow them in order to achieve and implement the solution I'm going to show you right now. So first, I would like to go over all the resources that I've already created. And so I will go to Azure Portal. Great. So as you can see here, I have already created two resource groups. Basically, just one, and the second one was automatically created. The first one is the webinar RG. This resource group is just contains two resources. The first one is my AKS cluster, which was named Webinar AKS, and my Azure Key Vault, which named Webinar KV. The second resource group is all the Kubernetes infrastructure resource group, containing the compute resources like the VMSS, the virtual machine scale set, next to the load balancer, the virtual network itself, and the managed identity. We will use them in the next steps. So, just to be honest, I've created one guideline for myself to combine both the AAD pod identity and the Key Vault documentation. So I will follow this guideline I've created, but just to know, you can follow the different guys separately for the AAD pod identity and the Key Vault, and it's the same result. So don't worry about it. Great. So first, as I said before, and if you can remember from the presentation, I have to start by deploying the AAD pod identity. Why? Because I want that my cluster will be able to communicate with my Azure Key Vault. And in order to achieve that, I have to choose a specific authentication way. How can I communicate with Azure? So as I mentioned before, in this case, I just chose the AAD pod identity. So let's start with the demo and see how it works. Just one step before, I want to go back to my Azure portal and click on the Key Vault. And just to show you the secrets inside the Key Vault, I've already created one secret named secret 1. And if I want to see what's the value of the secret is just hello. So that's the secret we are going to test today.
Itai, before we
yeah.
move forward, we have a question. Second time it's being posted.
Yes.
Why not AKV2 Kubernetes?
Yeah. Okay. That's a good question. I cannot view the questions, right?
Yeah, you can on the right.
Okay.
But
Okay. No worries. Okay. So basically, this is a different solution. The AKV to AKS is a solution which can help me to ensure that all of the secrets inside my Azure Key Vault will be converted to a Kubernetes secrets. In this case, in this webinar, we are going to mount all the secrets inside a Key Vault to a specific Kubernetes pod in my cluster. And in this case, or I can think of the common use of this use case is more for applications who wants to mount the secret to a specific pod, use them by taking them hard-coded by the application, from the mounted path, and then delete them and store them only in the application level without store them not even as a secret in my cluster. So these are different solutions, but yes, so it really depends on the purpose. Is there another question in the queue, Ilanit?
Nothing right now.
Great. So I want to continue with the demo. And just to know, guys, I will leave time for Q&A at the end of the webinar, so don't worry about it. Great. So basically, I've just already connected to my AKS cluster. And just to start with the demo, I want to create a namespace for each of them. The AAD pod identity is different namespace, and the Key Vault implementation it will be in a different namespace. So we will start by creating a namespace in my cluster named AAD pod identity. Yes. Next, I will go through the documentation and I will follow all the steps in this guideline. So as we can see, the first step is just to add the Helm repository. So I will copy the command, and the Helm repository is already exists in my cluster, so that's good. I'm using, by the way, Helm 3, as you can see here. What's next? I want to deploy the AAD pod identity deployment by using Helm on my cluster. In this case, I will not use, we have two same commands here, but I will use the second one because if I will go back to Azure portal and click on my AKS cluster, we will find that I'm using the KubeNet as the network plugin for my cluster. So it's just have another, let's say, another flag that I have to consider when I want to deploy the AAD pod identity to a clusters with KubeNet plugin. So I will copy this command, and I will change the namespace to be on my AAD pod identity namespace. Great. So we will wait to the output. Amazing. As now we can see that we've deployed the AAD pod identity on the cluster. So just let's run kubectl get pods under my AAD pod identity namespace. And as we can see, we have 3 pods. The NMI that you can remember, the NMI is runs as a diamond set on my cluster, and I have only one node in my cluster. So that's the reason why I have only one phase of the NMI pod, and that's exactly this one. And the MIC, which runs as a deployment on my cluster, and there are 2 replicas of the deployment. So that's the reason why I can see here 2 pods. Great. What's next? Now I will follow the documentation. So I will expose and export, some environment variable to help me to deploy automatically the next steps, the required steps. So now I will export my subscription ID as required. Let's go to my resource group, subscription ID. Great. Also my tenant ID. What's next? I don't have to run the AZ login because I've already logged into my tenant, to my subscription on Azure. Next, I want to export the name of the resource group of my cluster, which is the webinar RG. The same for the cluster name. webinar AKS, and identity resource group is just run an Azure CLI command to identify what is the infrastructure resource group of my Kubernetes cluster. So if I will try to print the output of this environment variable, as we can see, is just identify that this is the resource group of my Kubernetes infra with all of the compute resources and so on. So the MC, that's exactly my resource group. What's next? Export identity name. So basically, in this guide, I suppose to create a managed identity, a new one with this identity name. But in this case, I've already created the managed identity before, so I'm going to use an existing one. So I just have to pick up the name of the managed identity. So I'll go back to the MC resource group. If I scroll down, I will use this managed identity, webinar AKS agent pool. This is the name of the identity. So just paste it here, and great. What's next? This is the Azure CLI command, who responsible to create the managed identity. But as I mentioned, I don't want to create a new one because I already did it. So all what I have to do is just to run to export the two last environment variable, and I'm ready to start. So let's run the command. Great. I want to validate. Right, this is the client ID. I will show you where we can find it over the portal. And this is the resource ID. Great. So if I'm going to the portal and click on my managed identity, sorry, as you can see, I can find here the client ID. That's exactly what the export command I just ran did. And under the properties in the left menu, I can find the resource ID here. So that's it. Okay, so now this is the most important step. We have to take it into account. We have to validate our managed identity on Azure has the required permissions. And the required permissions basically is just to put the, to assign, sorry, the managed identity operator role on the MC resource group, on the infra resource group, and the virtual machine contributor. So that's exactly what I'm going to do now. I'm on my resource group on the MC. I'm going to the access control, add role assignment. I'm going to choose the, where is that? Manage identity operator. Great. Choose the managed identity, webinar AKS agent pool. Select, review, assign, and click. Now I want to add the virtual machine contributor. The same, I will select my managed identity. And perfect. Now I'm going to deploy, if you remember the diagram I've showed you regarding the AAD pod identity, I'm going to deploy the Azure identity. I don't want to expand too much on the AAD pod identity because the main focus is the Key Vault integration in this webinar. So I'll just take it, but as we can see, it will going to deploy Azure identity as a CRD on my cluster with the name of the identity name. This is the environment variable, which I exported just 1 minute ago, and with the client ID of my managed identity and the client and the resource ID of the managed identity. So just let's copy the command. I will clear the screen and paste it. Great. So as we can see, Azure Identity has been created. Next, I'm going to deploy the Azure Identity binding. After I deployed the Azure Identity, we have to deploy the Azure Identity binding. So I've already deployed it. And next, all what I have to do is just I want to validate if the AAD pod identity deployment is working as well as expected or not. So what I have to do is just to deploy a sample pod, an example one, to help me discover if it works or not. And it do it by taking the a basic image, a demo pod, let's say, which will try to use the AAD pod identity by set this label to the pod, and if it works, so we are expecting to see a specific output, and if not, we will do we can understand that it doesn't work. So great. So I've already deployed the pod. As you can see here, I have one pod named demo in my default namespace, which is in a running state. And all what I have to do is just to view and fetch the logs from the pod. And I'm expecting to see the following output, like try decoding your token with the JWT token, and so on and so on. So just let's try to do it. kubectl logs for demo pod. Just a moment. Azure Identity and Azure, great. Get Azure Identity. Amazing. I have the Azure Identity with the name of my managed identity on Azure, and Azure Identity binding. Yeah. Great. So I will try to deploy the pod again without the node selector, just because we're using KubeNet. So let's deploy kubectl get pods. Yeah, we have the demo pod, kubectl logs for demo pod. It will take a while. Just a moment. Yeah, pods. Yeah. Okay. So I will just skip this step for now because I don't want to debug what I did wrong in the previous steps. So I will just skip it and jump into the next step, which is the integration. How can we integrate the AKS cluster with the Key Vault itself? Okay, so basically, as I mentioned before, and as I did for the AAD pod identity, I just want to start by creating a namespace for the Key Vault. Great. What's next? Now, all what I want to do is to deploy the CSI driver on my cluster. So the first, again, here, I'm going to use Helm 3. I'm going to add the Helm repository to my cluster. So by running the command, as we can see, I've already exists. The repositories already exist. And now I'm going to deploy the CSI driver on the Key Vault, namespace. If we will wait a while, we will be able to see that the CSI is installed on my cluster under the Key Vault namespace. Great. So let's validate kubectl get pods under the Key Vault, and great. We have all the necessary pod, all of them in a running state, so it's good. What's next? I have to export again, just to help me with the next deployments and so on, to export some environment variables. I've already did it, and I don't have to do it right now. So, and what's next is how to create there are a set of commands which is creating a resource group on Azure and create a Key Vault and then set a secret inside the Key Vault. So in our case, we already have the webinar KV, which contains one secret named secret one. So the secret one, as you can remember, its value is hello. So that's what we are going to see. So let's go through the documentation again. Now I have to deploy on my cluster the secret provider class. The secret provider class is just a Kubernetes object and resource which help me to identify all the secrets I want to fetch from my Key Vault and mount to my Kubernetes pods. So here, this is where can I define all the secrets. As you can see under the, let's go over the parameters. Use pod identity true because this is the authentication method I chose. The Key Vault name, this is the name of my Key Vault, in this case, webinar KV. Cloud name, it's just an optional, and we can ignore it. And under the objects, we can find a list or array which contains all of my secrets in my Key Vault that, again, I want to be able to mount to a specific pod. So the object name is the name of the secret. The object type is secret, like it may be a secret key or certificate. And the last parameter is the tenant ID, which is the tenant ID of my Azure account. So for that, I've just prepared two YAML files. The first one is the secret provider class. Let's view the secret provider class. And as we can see here, we have secret provider class named Azure KV name pod ID. The provider is Azure because we are going to use the Key Vault. The parameters, so we are going to use the AAD pod identity, so that flag should be set to true. The Key Vault name, this is the webinar KV, which represents my Key Vault on my directory on Azure. And the last one is the object, is the array of the secret. So I have only one secret in my Key Vault named secret1. The object type is secret. The object version, it's not really it's not a mandatory field. And the tenant ID, this is my tenant ID. So all what I can do, I just can easily to create the secret provider class on my cluster. Great. So we can just run get secret provider class to validate. Good, 9 seconds ago. And the last step here is just to create a pod and mount all the secrets to this pod. And for that, I want to show you, I've already prepared the second YAML file, which named test pod. I just want to open this file. And great. We can see that we are going to deploy a pod with a basic image of BusyBox, and I'm going to use a volume, which is the secret provider class, which is, the volume, which is the CSI driver, and the CSI driver will point to my secret provider class to get all the secrets. And then I'm going to mount the secret as a volume mount to my pod, to my container inside the pod by using the volume mount in my YAML file. And that's it. So what else, what we have here? Okay, the last important thing that I can think of, it's the labels. If you can remember, without the labels, I will not be able to fetch and get the secret. And that's why, because if I want and if I need an access from one of my pods inside my cluster to talk with and communicate with Azure resources, so for that I have to choose a method an authentication method. And in order to use the AAD pod identity that I've deployed, so I have to add the label, the AAD pod pod ID binding with the Azure identity, with the selector of the binding. And I will show you where we can find the selector, but it's really important to remember or to know, because in this way we can communicate with Azure. So let me show you. Let's run kubectl Azure identity binding. And as you can see, here is the name of the binding, the webinar AKS agent pool binding. I have the selector. The Azure identity is assigned with the webinar AKS agent pool. And the selector, this is the value I should put in my pod labels in order to work with this AAD pod identity. Because I can create multiple identities for multiple and different purposes in my cluster, like, for example, one managed identity to communicate with storage, and one managed identity to communicate with Key Vault, and so on and so on. And that's the reason why I'm using the selector in my pods. So now I'm going to deploy as well my test pod. Great. If I will try to view the state of the pod, pods, I will see that it cannot be in a running, it's going to fail just because of my AAD pod identity, because it tried to use the AAD pod identity, but it cannot do it because the AAD pod identity isn't deployed as well. So I want to go over the documentation just to show you and illustrate how we can do it. But for that, I just want to make sure the pod will not going to run. Okay. So, sorry. So just let's try to imagine that I've created the pod, the BusyBox pod, and mount all the secrets as well as it's defined here in the YAML file. And then I want to validate. And if I want to validate, all what I can do is just to log into the container by running the kubectl exec, the name of the container, and then dash dash and the command. By running the command ls and the path to the mountain path, as you can see here, this is the same path. We are expecting to see the value of the name of my secret. Like here after the slash, I will be able to find all the secrets defined under the secret provider class here. So the name, by running the ls command, all what I'm expecting to see is just a file with the content of the secret one. And what's next? All what I can do, if I want to get the content itself, I can run a different command inside my container, is just to cut the content of the secret one file under the mounted directory. That's it, guys. I would like to know, that's the time for Q&A. So I'd like to know if you have any questions. In this time, in parallel, I will just try to fix the AAD pod identity, so we will be able to view online the results. But if not, I can promise you that the guides I've shared with you working as well. And just feel free to ask anything you want. And thanks a lot for your listening. Um,
Don't have any questions yet. If anyone has any questions, feel free to share them in the chat.
Itay, for the guidelines, is that part of either of the two GitHub links you shared with us earlier, or is that a separate link? There's a couple people in the audience that have asked for the guidelines link.
Sorry, I didn't hear you as well. What did you ask regarding the documentation?
The guidelines that you keep referencing for the session, they were just asking, is that part of those GitHub links you shared earlier, or is that separate?
Yeah. It's a part of, yes.
Where would they find that? Just because they were asking specifically for the guidelines aspect. Do you mind referencing that on your page?
Okay, so I will open, sorry.
Thank
I
you.
will open the GitHub repositories. This is directly forward you to the walkup, to the walkthrough, to the documentation as I did it. So I cannot basically understand the entire question. Let me see if under the AAD. No.
One of the audience members just said that they were not permitted to access the notes page, that they just set up an account to view those guidelines and the GitHub links, but that they were not permitted to access notes page. So
Okay, really strange.
Siegfried, you're in the chat. Is this their first time setting up a GitHub account? Maybe it just needs. So this page specifically, what's this link?
No. This page is in private. I just prepared this guideline to myself, which is combination of both links: the AD pod identity guideline and the CSI Key Vault
Okay,
guide.
so the information can be found between
Under
those two, but it's just a little
yeah,
bit differently organized for your private page.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, just
Yes.
was getting clarification on that. Does that make sense to audience? Let us know if you have more questions regarding that. And then if you have any other questions on the content, please let us know as well.
Yeah, I will try to fix it, to see if I can fix the problem. And
Oh, people want your private page.
okay, so I have an idea. I will take it to another platform, maybe to a GitHub or something like that, and I will paste this page as well, and I will share it. I can do it later.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so just for reference, again, I shared the links earlier, but I'll just share them again quickly with you all for the walkthrough, for the demo, and also the pod identity, just so that you have that handy, everyone. But yeah, I think they appreciated that. It's helpful for everyone.
Yeah, no worries. I'll do it.
Yeah, and then if anybody has any other questions in the interim, I will just quickly do a little plug here for the audience as well. If this is your first time tuning in, this is part of the Microsoft Reactor community program in partnership with 2B Cloud. If this is your first time joining us, we put out community events, free workshops all week long. So feel free to find us. We're on Meetup. We have a website, but it's temporarily down as it needed to move and relocate. So we're in the process of doing that, and it'll be back online soon. If you have availability to do so, we ask that you submit a survey, which I'll just quickly pop up on the screen as well while Ite works on the solution. I dropped the link into the chat as well, although it might have come through a little bit weird. So let me just
Yeah,
reshare
I
that.
know that the time is over, but I'll take another, I don't know, 3 to 5 minutes to try to fix it. So who
maybe
wants?
but maybe we can suggest if someone wants to get a link, you can leave your email here and we will email it to you directly.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you can private, if you're on Meetup and you joined the session through Meetup, I would say private message me for that information, or otherwise he would add it into the GitHub. I don't want to have an email address for the public YouTube feed, but yep. And then, so I just dropped the link for the survey. One of the individuals asked Ite a summary kind of the techniques perhaps behind doing all of this. If you had a summary of that, they just said that the intro to all of it was a little bit quick for them. I don't know if you have anything that you can kind of say in the steps for the integration process.
Yeah, I'm just trying to fix it.
The recording, they can always watch it.
Yeah, okay, so now it works.
Yeah, we'll bring that back up.
Yeah, so now it works, and I can continue to try to show you the how it works. So just a moment, it will take another 10 seconds, and I will explain everything.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, of course.
And this is you just running through the demo, correct? This is the part that
Yeah.
had an error earlier, correct?
Got it. Mm. Mhm.
I think the best, if I don't keep everyone, we'll just post it to everyone on that registered. Rebecca will share it with you. You can share it with everyone that registered through Meetup, and we will share it with everyone who registered through Eventbrite. That way, everyone will have it.
That sounds perfect.
Itai, you okay with that?
What did you say? Sorry.
We will share that with everyone who registered on both platforms, so we won't
Yeah.
have to get everyone waiting right now.
Yeah. Sure. Sure. Of course.
Perfect. So we
Okay.
will share the links, and of course, feel free to reach out either to Rebecca or to myself via private message, and we'll be happy to share more content with you.
Yep. And if you're still tuning in, he's just running through. There was an error earlier. He just skipped ahead to the next steps, but now he's troubleshooted it and he's working through it. And so if you're still tuning in, this is just a little bit of the previous earlier steps that he's resolving now.
So basically, it's going to be work. It's going to work in maybe 30 seconds, if it's relevant anymore. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great.
Yep.
Okay.
So if you want to just explain everything.
Yeah. So okay. So now just deploy the CSI driver. I redeployed it because after I redeployed the AAD pod identity, probably I missed something over the way. So I just redeployed the AAD pod identity, and then I redeployed again. All what I did is according to the documentation and the guidelines. So I didn't do something from my head or something like that. And now I just redeployed the CSI driver. I can show you here, if you can remember. Added a Helm repository, then installed the Helm chart, and now I've already created the secret in my Key Vault, as you know, webinar KV. And all what I have to do is to create a secret provider class and the pod to mount all the secrets. So if you remember, I just told you that I prepared the YAML files before. So I will try to deploy the secret provider class to my cluster. Just let's validate if if the file is configured correctly. So true, webinar KV, that's the name of the key vault, secret one, and this is the tenant ID of 2B Cloud. So great. I will deploy the secret provider class. Good. And now let's view the pod YAML. And this is the name. Webinar AKS Aiden pool. This is the selector. Busy box. Great. Name of is the same of the name of the volume. And the mount path is /mnt/secret store. So and this is the name of the secret provider class. So yeah, it should work. Let's deploy the pod again. Hallelujah. Great. And now, as you remember, if I will run this command, I'm expecting to see the output, the name of the secret, because I already have only one secret. So let's run. Yeah, right. Here is the secret one. This is the file. By running this command inside this pod or this container. And now what I want to do, I want to run the same command with, now I want to print the content of the secret one. So enter, and great. As you can see, I've got a content of the secret, and this is the hello. And now I just want to show you, if you want to connect to the container. So let's connect to it. And okay, just a moment. Okay, and let's connect to the container. And as we can see, we have the /mnt. Let's cd to mnt. We have the secret store, so let's cd to secret store, and let's view what we have under this directory. Sorry, have secret1, this file. If I will cut secret1 as we did outside the container, here is the content. Hello. And that's it, guys. So it works, everything works. And I just did something wrong before. And that's it. Again, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm glad that we were able to get that sorted. This was wonderful. We had a couple hiccups throughout, but technical difficulties. But I think in the end, it was 100% successful. So, thank you to our audience for tuning in, Ite. Thank you again for being a part of this session and for continuing to partner with us as well, and to be Cloud too. Our audience certainly appreciates all of it. So at this time, we are over a little bit. We ran past time a little, so we'll wrap it up here. If there's anything you want to wrap up with, Ite, now's the opportunity. We have a lot of people dropping thank yous into the chat, which is really nice to see. Thank you all as well for being a part of this and participating. If you are not familiar, again, with the reactor, we are on Meetup. We have a website. It's temporarily just a frozen page, but it will be back up and running in the coming weeks. So do check that out. Save that to your browser. Check us out on Twitter, and you'll find us, as mentioned before, on YouTube. This is the channel. This is where we're at, and all of our on-demand content gets posted here. So thank you all again.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks a lot.
Take care all.
Thank you, everyone.